Thank you very much for the invitation. It's delightful to be giving a talk in this magnificent space, which has been so magnificently restored together with surroundings by Agnieszka and her colleagues. So I'm going to dive straight into the first monument in Cairo that has major examples of surviving stucco work, which is the Mosque of Ibn Tulun. And of course, this is one which is exceptional in Cairo because it's one whose plan and decoration was almost entirely, as far as we know, imported from Iraq. Ibn Tulun was originally from Iraq, and he evidently thought the way a big mosque should be built was the way he had seen it in his youth. So the plan of the mosque, the ziyada, the spiral minaret that you see here, and also, let me just make sure I can find the button for the next slide here. Okay. And the stucco decoration, as you see, is one which is exactly like those of Samarra. It's been argued as well that there are influences from the organization of geometric designs from Byzantium as well, but that's true, of course, of the Samarra examples, just so that you have an example of the original Samarra. This is one which is from the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, for instance, and it has exactly the same organizing mechanism of abstract vegetalistes for the most part within a geometric framework. The Mosque of Ibn Tulun is in good company in a sense because the spread of this stucco style was extremely widespread. It spread from Baghdad not only westwards to Cairo but also eastwards. Here's an example, for instance, from northern Afghanistan, the Mosque of the Nine Domes in northern Afghanistan. And you can see from the details that the type of stucco that you see here is exactly the same that is reproduced on the walls of the Mosque of Ibn Tulun in Cairo. Fatimid stucco is also well represented. We have a detail of the mihrab here of the Mosque of Al-Buyushi on the Muqattam Cliffs in Cairo. And one of the interesting features of it is the amount of geometric background decoration that you have within the floral elements in particular in this detail that you see from the mihrab. And that's found together with the next major example of Fatimid stucco, also in the Mosque of Ibn Tulun. This is the one that was built by Badr al-Ghuyushi's son, Al-Afdal Shah, and it has the name of Al-Mustansir here at the top, together with Al-Afdal further on, which means we can date it exactly to the year in which Al-Mustansir died and Al-Afdal started his reign in about 1090. But here too, you can see perhaps that in the background of the decoration you have this same geometric decoration, which wasn't present in the earlier examples of Fatimid floral decoration. So where did this come from? Well, here again, there's an example of monuments from further east. I took these photographs in the Museum of Doshanbe in Tajikistan, where in some of the local monuments from the Seljuk period, from the 12th century, we have exactly this same kind of stucco decoration. How did the craftsmen who knew about this kind of decoration bring it to Cairo? Or did craftsmen from Cairo travel to the east? I think the first explanation is rather more likely. After having gone on the Hajj, the nearest big city to the Hijaz, where craftsmen perhaps could have found work, would have been Cairo, and it acted as a magnet for all of its existence for craftsmen to visit. And the same applies, in fact, to another very prevalent branch of stucco decoration that is influenced from abroad, namely from the Maghreb. This is one of the most important monuments of the Ayyubid period in Cairo, the dome of Imam Shafi, built in 1211 by Al-Kamil. And we're looking at the outside, which has in these areas here a series of polylobed arches and small Kufic inscriptions within it, which are extremely reminiscent of contemporary examples in the Maghreb. Here are another few details from the balustrades of the exterior of the tomb of Imam Shafi. The same kind of polylobed arches with Kufic at the bottom. in various configurations. And the closest that we have to this is the decoration from the Almohad period in the Great Mosque of Fez in what is today Morocco, in the Maghreb, where there are many examples of this type of decoration. Now, of course, any of the Maghrebis who were going on the pilgrimage, Cairo was on the land route across North Africa. So this was an automatic stop for them, and that's why, as we'll see, the existence of many more examples of Maghrebi influenced stucco is not at all difficult to explain. There's a detail here of wooden frieze that is inside the mosque, the tomb of Imam Shafi. It's not made of stucco, it's actually made of wood, but it illustrates something which you really need to keep in mind when you're looking at stucco decoration, and that is the fact of how much more magnificent and easier to read the decoration would have been in its original colored state. We can assume that virtually all stucco work was originally colored. Today, unfortunately, most of the color, if not all, in most cases, has been totally lost. But this is a view of the frieze as it was when I came to Cairo, first in the 1980s, and after that it was restored, repainted, and you can see very clearly the enormous difference that makes. So keep that in mind when you're looking at all of the other examples of stucco decoration as well. And just as an example too of how different restored painting can make to the original decoration in a monument, this is the so-called tomb of the Abbasid caliphs, probably the tomb of the sons of Baybars, the first major Mamluk sultan in the southern cemetery, which has been restored in the most recent decade. And this is mostly painted plaster, although in some of the niches, in fact, there is stucco applied on top of the plaster in relief, which has been recently repainted and lets you see exactly what the original decoration was like. Moving forward a little bit, in the Mamluk period, we have one of the most magnificent monuments in Cairo, the complex of Sultan Qaitbey. And of course, you're probably all most familiar with the magnificent entrance to the tomb here with its wonderful stucco decoration. No color remaining there originally. I'm also going to be showing you later a detail of this inscription frieze, which is on the exterior of the mausoleum, and at least part of which is original. But let's just look at the layout of the inside of the tomb, because it has a wealth of stucco designs whose variety probably hasn't really been appreciated. I've numbered all of the niches, for instance, that have stucco decoration on them. Now, several of these are copies, it's true. Many of the soffits of the octagon in the center repeat in alternate patterns, but a great number of them are original. So if you consider the total number here, it goes up to over 45. So we have an amazing number here. So this is an example from the stucco arches inside the walls. They're organized on fairly similar principles, but they're all hand decorated. So no two in general are the same as each other. And in fact, even if you compare the symmetrical decoration on each side of the central window, there you'll see some very slight variations as well. The same applies to the decoration on the soffits of the arches around the central octagon that you see here and here. And then on the inside of the drum of the dome towards the top of the building, you also have a great variety of stucco decoration, but you can see that the decoration of the geometric pattern with the central star here, or of this geometric infill of the circular window, they're both different in each case. Here is the detail I promised you from the inscription on the exterior of the mausoleum. And this, frankly, is extraordinary in terms of the decoration of its background. I don't know of any other monument in Cairo, or anywhere else for that matter, that has exactly this same kind of most unusual decoration of parallel lines with a few occasional leaves added to it, but with the lines not completely parallel all over the background, but at 45-degree angle, sometimes vertical, sometimes almost horizontal. What's the closest parallel for this? Well, actually, the closest parallel that I could find was something like this, which is a painting from a pharaonic tomb at Amarna. So I know what you're thinking. Here's O'Kane again, off on one of his ridiculous flights of fancy. How on earth would the stucco workers have been looking at pharaonic monuments to copy this kind of pattern? Well, you might have a point, but at the same time, just before this was built, in the mausoleum of Shagarat ad-Dur in the southern cemetery, there is a whole zone of transition which is painted with flowers that are derived from pharaonic examples. Just opposite this mausoleum is the tomb that she built for her husband, Salah Najmuddin Ayyub, and they hadn't been able to uncover all of the original painted decoration, but a few fragments that they have uncovered, such as this, show exactly the same kind of pharaonic-derived lotus painted decoration. And to Anassa Muhammad, after the earthquake of 1303, which devastated Cairo, when he restored the top story of the minaret, he restored it in the shape of pharaonic lotus capital. So maybe I'm not quite so fanciful as you might think after all. This is the interior of the Ribat of Mustafa Pasha in the southern cemetery, dating from about the same period as Qaitbey. And it too was remarkable for the Maghrebi-derived ornamentation that it has at the back of the Iwan on both sides. This is a detail from the left. There was an argument that this might have been from a later period of restoration in the 14th century, but Michael Meinecke, in fact, had pointed out that at the very top of this there is the Mamluk blazon of a so-called target, and it's one which only appears in monuments of the 14th century. So I think we can be pretty sure of the dating of this monument. But probably the most well-known example of Maghrebi-influenced stucco decoration is that on another magnificent monument next to Apollo, and in this case this is the Madrasa of An-Nasr Muhammad, with a minaret that is entirely covered on the exterior with stucco decoration. I mean, you should realize how lucky we are in Cairo to have a dry climate. It may not feel like luck all the time, but if you're trying to preserve stucco decoration, it's a wonderful, it makes it so much easier to keep it in its original state. And so if we look at some of the details of this, the niche here on the right-hand side, it's actually a detail of this area here. You can see the same idea of these multi-lobed arches with kufik at the bottom, which we had earlier in a different form in the mausoleum of Imam al-Shafi'i. And other examples of Maghrebi influences occur in many examples in Cairo, such as, for instance, this is from the exterior of the Mosque of Amr. This was an addition after the earthquake of 1303, which sadly has since been removed. It was removed, in fact, just before I came to Cairo in the 1980s. This is an example of the restoration again after the earthquake surrounding the mihrab of the Mosque of Al-Azhar. There's another one from a mosque in Fustat that is now in the Museum of Islamic Art in Cairo. The one of these six which isn't in Cairo is one in Damascus at the top left from the Mausoleum of At-Takriti just outside Damascus in the Salahiyah suburb, showing that there perhaps were so many Maghrebi workers in Cairo that they could even afford to venture further north into Syria to get a commission. Now, and inside this same Madrasa of An-Nasr Muhammad is another very famous example of stucco, the niche of the mihrab, which again for Cairo has some very unusual examples of openwork stucco bosses. not found in exactly this format anywhere else in Cairo. But we have several similar examples of it in monuments in Iran from around about the same period. This is the Friday Mosque of Urmiye in the northwest of Iran, dating from the Seljuk period, just a little bit earlier than that. There's another medallion which has been claimed by some scholars to be derived from Iranian examples. This is the mausoleum of Qawsun in the Southern Cemetery, the Qarafat al-Sughra, whose minaret very sadly was removed to make way for a car park recently beside Salah Salam. But at least so far, this is still standing. And in fact, my distinguished predecessor at AUC, Michael Rogers, argued very strenuously that this was a copy of the medallion that you see on the left-hand side, which is from a monument in Yaz from the 14th century, the complex of Shams-ad-Din. But if you look at it closely, it's not all that similar, I think. This is mostly molded stucco. This is carved. The surround has a Kufic inscription here. This has a cursive inscription. And the number of stars in the overall pattern is very different in both of these. So I think that's a bit of a false hearing. This really is just an example of traditional stucco design in Cairo. There's also one very other interesting feature about it. At the beginning of the inscription, it has the phrase, Mima Umar al-Rasm. And this is a phrase that only occurs on portable objects. Now, you certainly don't think of a stucco medallion as being portable, but we know that Anas Muhammad was very supportive of the architectural endeavors of his emirs, Qawsun being one of his emirs. And there's a possibility that something like this medallion could have been made in a separate workshop and then brought and installed upon the wall of the mausoleum. Here's another good example of traditional Cairo stucco style in the Khanqa of Bunduk Dar, which is in the continuation of the Qasiba just south of Bab Zawela. And notice the keel arch here, a very sharp corner turn for it and the interior arch, something that you find in the nearly contemporary complex of Zain ad-Din, which is also in the Southern Cemetery. And this has another feature that you find in many Maghrebi examples, this kind of series of interlacing arches at the corner of inscriptions within cartouches, together with circular ones with the same interlace surrounding them. This is from almost the same period, where you have the same features as well. Here's the circular interlace and the inscription in the much longer cartouche. This is also a unique example in Cairo of stucco work that has insets of glass. You can see some details of that here. This is the Ribat of Sulaiman ibn Rafai, not far from the complex of Sultan Hassan, also dating from towards the end of the 13th century. Sadly, I think most of these glass insets have disappeared, but they at least have been recorded, and as I say, it's unique in Cairo, and in fact maybe unique in the Islamic world. I don't know of any other single example. Although there's another interesting parallel a little bit later in Cairo in the complex of Aslam Salah Dar, just beside the wall of Salah ad-Din, near, at the moment, just outside the Al-Azhar Park, which has medallions in stucco, and set within them are elements of glass as well. Not glass with decoration painted upon them as in the previous example, but just solid examples of glass. But this too is really extremely unusual, not just in Cairo, but anywhere within the Islamic world. And in fact, two of the finest examples of stucco domes are from these two monuments that I talked about. This one on the left is the mausoleum of Al-Rafai, Sulaiman al-Rafai from the Ribat, which has a wonderful pattern of arabesques upon the dome. They both have very similar zones of transition, completely covered with stucco, and there are wonderful ribs too in that of Zainuddin Yusuf in the Southern Cemetery, each of which individually have wonderful examples of arabesques on them. This is the interior of the mausoleum of Khalil, also dating from the end of the 13th century. Here's another good example of this circular medallion and the cartouches with the interlacing arches. Some very interesting examples of square kufik in stucco as well within that. And as I say, this is a very popular form of decoration at this particular time. This is from the Khanqa my mind, Salar and Sanjar, thank you, perfect, from the now vanished Khanqa that was in the courtyard. And this is from another tomb whose dating is controversial in the Northern Cemetery. The mausoleum of Sunkur Sadi, also in the Qasaba, has the same feature in the stucco work around the base of the dome, and there are also some wonderful stucco medallions as well on the outside of the monument, as well as on the engaged columns. So, just to give you an example, or an overall conspectus of how common this is, these are all examples from Cairo, either from the late 13th or early 14th century of this particular feature. One of the details here, in fact, is from this, which is something I hope you all know, since it's one of the prime exhibits in the Museum of Islamic Art in Cairo. But, I mean, for instance, I published a guidebook to this museum, and when I asked for information on where this had come from, no one was able to tell me. The records of its acquisition in the museum don't say where it came from, unfortunately. But then later I started doing some digging in the comité bulletins, and there's a very interesting entry for a couple of years before this, where the museum has reported, or I should say, the donors are reported as having sold to the comité the stucco interior of the qa of the Palace of Bakhtamur, of the main reception hall there. And this is rather astonishing because although this is a monument that is extremely well known from the sources, and Nasser Muhammad is reported to have lent corvée labor to it, for instance, to build it, and an enormous sum for the embellishment of it, there's absolutely no mention of it surviving into modern times, into the 20th century. It existed on the shores of Birkat al-Fil, near the Mosque of Azbak al-Yusufi. But Bakhtamur was a saqi, and we have the emblem of the cupbearer on both sides, and the fact that it entered the museum just a couple of years after this purchase makes me think that it's very likely that it's the same one. So in fact, this is the only surviving example we have of the architectural record of one of the most important emirs of Nasser Muhammad's time. He was the most important emir until Nasser Muhammad thought he was going to be poisoned by him with Ulmas al-Hajib, and had them both poisoned on a trip to Mecca and Medina, unfortunately. So some other interesting minor monuments have the same kind of little dense examples of muqarnas, for instance, that you find in Maghrebi monuments. And there's something interesting here which I don't know if you can see too clearly. It just looks like perhaps a geometric design, but in fact it's what's called a shish Ali. It's a geometric design with the name of Ali, whose positive and negative is the same. One that was actually also very common in Iran. It appears in several other monuments in Cairo, but none of these were sponsored by Shia, so it's one, of course, which is just recognition of the general honor in which Ali, as the fourth caliph, or the Alid family in general, was recognized by both Sunni and Shia alike. Here's of this mihrab that I mentioned before, which was originally on the exterior of the Mosque of Amr. This is from one of the photographs in the Creswell archive in the American University in Cairo, and shows the same kind of muqarnas decoration and polylobed arches, typical of the Maghreb, as I said. And although I mentioned Stucco in Cairo as the title of the lecture, it's worthwhile venturing outside because one of the finest examples of a Mamluk stucco mihrab is actually in the Mosque of Al-Amri in Us. So next time you're wandering around the pharaonic monuments in Luxor, take an afternoon off, take a taxi up to Us, and you'll see this together with the earlier surviving wooden minbar in Cairo. They're both wonderful examples of art. And yes, here too we have this circular panel with the engaged arches and the cartouches in between them, together with the dense moharnas within the arch below, indicative of Maghrebi influence. Another example that has frequently been cited as one of foreign influence is the presence of Chinese lotuses. So we're looking at some here which are in the complex of Sultan Hassan, carved in stone on the outside of the building, and just visible here between the knocker leading from the Qibla Iwan to the mausoleum. In fact, there are many more examples in stucco on some of the monuments. Here is the Khanqa of Omanuk in the northern cemetery, not from where we are now. Although I think since this photograph was taken, unfortunately, the decoration on the side of the Iwan has deteriorated somewhat, but you can certainly still see some of the Chinese lotuses that are prominent here. The most obvious example of Iranian influence, of course, is in the Thine mosaic decoration of the drum. But we're also going to look at the mihrab in the main Iwan, and this has a couple of interesting features. There's an arabesque in the hood of the mihrab which leaves a lot of empty space behind it. That's really rather unusual for Cairo. Usually the whole of the space is almost completely covered with decoration. And the soffit of the arch, as you can see, it also has this series of Chinese lotuses. But let's go back to this feature of arabesques appearing against an almost blank ground. This too is a feature that otherwise is known mostly from Iran. These are examples from the Seljuk Mosque of Aradistan near Isfahan in Iran, dating from the 12th century. We have it on the arch of the main Iwan, and also in a couple of the niches or decorative areas inside the building. So this too is likely to be an example of foreign influence. Let's just go back to the interior of the Iwan of Omanuk. It has a number of wonderful stucco medallions. Sadly, this is the goal for the local football team, so that one's been a little bit damaged, but the ones on the side are in better condition, and this shows very much just traditional style of Cairene stucco work. Medallions in the form of either circular ones or the Bukhariya, the elongated ones, are of course a typical feature of many monuments of Mamluk Cairo. And here are just a few examples to show you the variety that we have in these. The Mosque of Maridani is also one of the most magnificent. It has recently been restored, but it has stucco decoration that is totally different from any other monument in Cairo. On the right-hand side, you see a naturalistic tree. Why were they decorating monuments with naturalistic trees at this stage? You can see, in fact, it's present all around the zone of transition and in these areas just above the mihrab. Here's another detail of this area above the mihrab, so more of these naturalistic trees instead of the very stylized arabesque, which is the typical decoration. The origin of this, I believe, is very likely to be something like the colored slide on the bottom, which is a detail from the interior of the Madrasa of Baybars beside the Great Mosque of Damascus. And of course, the Great Mosque of Damascus itself is favored for its wonderful mosaic decoration of naturalistic trees, probably depicting the heaven to which Muslims aspired. That's the reason for its appearance in the Mausoleum of Baybars, and probably also for its appearance here in the complex of Al-Maridani. But it never became popular. This is the only example that I know of in Cairo. Here's an example of the interior of a house which was later turned into a mosque. So this is a building that originally dates from the second half of the 14th century, and later Khush Qadam turned it into a mosque. And it too is unusual in having painted decoration, for instance, that features Chinese lotuses prominently. But it also has a number of wonderful bukhareyas on the side. And each of these, they're all slightly different, but each of these also favors these Chinese lotuses very prominently, as you can see. And this is another circular one that's in the Qibla Iwan, or what is now the Qibla Iwan. It originally was simply the main reception hall of the Qa'a. And yeah, it too has Chinese lotuses in a slightly different design from the other medallions. This too is from the interior of a house of Muhibbuddin, which is quite near to the complex of Qalawun, just off the street, right opposite the mausoleum. It has been restored recently, and in a sense it's been restored incorrectly in that they have added glass between the stucco network that you see at the top of the dome. Now, incorrectly, well, they probably didn't want dust or rain or anything else to disturb the interior of the mausoleum. So as a restoration decision for modern times, it's just fine. But it wasn't like this originally. You're probably going to be at a loss to guess what its original purpose was. This, in fact, was the toilet which was situated beside it, and the dome had to be open to release the smells. So this is one of the finest medieval toilets that you'll find anywhere in the world, I think. Moving into the 15th century, the examples of stucco decoration get fewer and fewer. One of the exceptions is right at the beginning of the 15th century in the complex of Al-Mu'ayyid. I mean, it's mostly famous, of course, for its wonderful Qibla wall with the inlaid marble decoration. But a bit more difficult to notice than as you're looking at it is the stucco decoration that is on the wall above. But if you look carefully, you can see that this too has some magnificent and unusual types of stucco decoration. This medallion with unusual protrusions coming for it, or this very complex design with an interesting inscription above it as well. But in addition to this, on the passageway that is now leading to this area, there are some separate arches which have individual stucco designs that are very different from one another. Here's one that is of typical local inspiration, the kind of arabesque symmetrical around a vertical axis. And here's one with a lot of open background left, just like that of the Mihrab al-Khanqa of Mamluk as well. And on a third, we have one that is more obviously derivative of Maghrebi decoration with the polylobed arches and the very detailed work inside it. Just a little bit later than this is the complex of Al-Ashraf Barsbeh within the city, not the one in the Southern Cemetery near us. This is the one within the city. And this has two extraordinarily intricate stucco panels. You may not be able to see this too clearly, but at the top it has an interesting combination of a cursive inscription with a smaller one in Kufic above. That's actually very typical of contemporary examples in Ilkhanid, Iran. But what's surprising about this, in fact, having looked at this just side by side last night before I showed it to you, I can't find any difference between the two. They must have been working from a very precise, I think, painted or pricked panel to make these two, to have them so identical. In almost all of the other stucco examples that we have seen, there is slight variation from side to side, but these are the exception to that rule. Finally, there is one major example in the period of Qaitbey. and that is the Qubbat al-Fadawiya, which is in Abbasiyya, in the suburb that Yashbak, one of the emirs of Qaitbey, built. Nothing visible from the outside. It's been recently restored. I'm not sure if this marble paneling actually was there originally, but all of the work that you see in colour above this, it has recently been repainted, which is fortunate because it does enable us to see the patterns much more easily. This is all of stucco rather than, as you might think at first sight, of carved stone. So all of the zone of transition, of the drum, of the interior of the dome, which in the way in which you have these little medallions getting smaller as they go up, increasing the sense of perspective. It's one that reminds me of an actual later monument, the dome of one of the most magnificent Safavid monuments in Iran, that of Sheikh Lutfallah from this early 17th century. And here's the climax, the decoration in this magnificent circular medallion filled with an inscription at the top. But this is the last hurrah. After this, of course, when the Ottomans take over Cairo, they bring with them their own aesthetic, which relies much more on tile work for decoration or simply on painted wood, and the art of stucco seems to die out. I don't know of any major subsequent examples. But still, think of what we've been looking at. I've just obviously been able to show you some of the highlights. There are dozens and dozens more monuments which have wonderful stucco decoration, but we have a continuum here from the 9th century right up to the 15th century of major monuments with an enormous variety of stucco decoration. This is quite unparalleled anywhere else, not just in the Middle East, but in the Islamic world as a whole. So we're very lucky to have this corpus to look at and enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this wonderful lecture. I would like just to give one comment. Recently, we have done conservation of a ceiling of Munira Hamdi, Mausoleum of Munira Hamdi, which is the late 19th mausoleum here next to Mausoleum of Khedive Tawfiq. And it has a ceiling made of stucco that we were able to restore. And it was extremely interesting to see how conservators work on them and how complex craft it is. So it allows me to admire more the ancient craftsmen. And I hope, Bernard, you will accept a few questions.
Of course.
There is another mic at the back, so if you please, whoever wants to comment, to ask anything, you are most welcome. Yes, please.
Hi, Professor. Thank you so much for sharing all of these wonderful images with us. I wanted to ask about your comment about the color that was in their original states. Is it safe to assume that all of these facades that we're looking at, whether in the interiors or exteriors, were colored, or could it be an exception depending on the locations?
I think it's safe to assume that all of them were coloured. In fact, that applies not just to stucco decoration, but all of the carved stone decoration that we find on the exterior monuments. So in recent restoration works such as that of the complex of Sultan Qaitbey, for instance, in the exterior stucco work on the main inscription surrounding the courtyard, they found the remains of some green and yellow paint. So even on exterior locations, carved stone was painted, and I'm 100% sure that the same would apply to stucco, both on the exterior and in the interior.
You have next, and you have the mic over there.
It's amazing. So when the university come to Cairo to introduce a new style with them to the architecture, I was thinking, do we know how they introduce those styles to Cairo, to bring the artists in them, or the Cairo artists taking time to learn the new techniques?
I don't think they needed to learn new techniques so much as to copy the patterns which have been used in previous places. And I think it's more likely that we can assume that foreign craftsmen brought with them either their own knowledge of the patterns they worked with in their homelands, whether from the Maghreb or from Iran, or they may even have brought pattern books with them. I mean, we've got no pattern books that have survived really before the 15th century, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. We have an historical reference to a plan of a mosque being sent from Tabriz to Yazd in the 14th century, so they were certainly writing on paper at that time, and I think that could have been the easiest way in which patterns could have been transferred.
Thank you for this amazing lecture. It was really informative. I have two questions. The first is comparing this, because it do this comparison with this kind of drawings and things and with the ancient Egyptian ones. Is there any reason why the colors went away and why the ancient Egyptian ones, technical reasons, why those still have some ancient Egyptian references of colored spaces and the Islamic one or not? And the second question is this unusual space that you showed, the dome, with the glass dome of Atrulit, as you mentioned. This is a very unusual thing that usually domes existed over mausoleums or tombs or things like this. Does it happen elsewhere, or is it just one of a time?
Okay, with regards to the first question, I don't know why the designer suddenly turned to pharaonic monuments for inspiration. But we have this very narrow period in which we do have the few examples that I showed, or at least I think they're plausibly, especially the painted ones, they're very obviously a pharaonic inspiration. But it died out immediately after that. So there are no historical records that would tell us why this was so. As regards the stucco dome over the toilet, I don't know of any other surviving examples, but in fact there are many references to these in historical sources. So we know that it was actually quite common at the time.
So, if there are no more questions, I would like to make one small announcement. We have the AUC Press books outside, if you wish to look for them, and if you buy Bernard's book, you may take this opportunity for him to sign the copy. And last but not least, I would like to give the floor to Jarosław Dobrowolski.
Thank you. To give the floor is maybe too much to say. I would just like to say, dear Bernard, thank you so much for this captivating presentation. We were thinking, what could we offer you as a token of appreciation and gratitude that would still somehow relate to Stucco in Cairo? And we decided on this. It's just a print, but at least a signed print of a drawing that was made 35 years ago. So I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you for your attendance.